The Silent Forest. The story began with a search for a lost truth, but all of it started on a silent night. A night when the painful stillness itself seemed overwhelming. Torrential rain and howling winds whispered through the trees, devouring everything in their path. In pursuit of discovering a new secret, 3 friends, Yuval, Yosef, and Micha'el, entered an ancient forest. Their goal was to uncover the truth about this place, known to locals as the Silent Forest. There were many stories about this forest. Some said it was full of magical forces, while others claimed that ancient spirits roamed here, luring people into madness. But Yuval, Yosef, and Micha'el did not care. They just wanted to uncover the mystery behind these strange tales. They started their expedition from the edge of the forest. Yuval, the leader of the group, was determined. His heart was set on revealing the truth about this place. Yosef, Yuval's childhood friend, was with him but harbored doubts. He suspected that this place might be more dangerous than they anticipated, but he chose to support his friends. Micha'el, the most passionate researcher among them, was the most excited. He believed that the secrets hidden in the forest were waiting for them to discover. As they ventured deeper into the woods, a heavy silence enveloped them. Their voices seemed to vanish amidst the towering trees. The further they walked, the more the branches reached out like skeletal hands, brushing against them as though the forest itself was aware of their presence, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. One day, while they were approaching an ancient ruin, Yuval felt a certain discomfort. He told it to Yosef and Micha'el, who brushed it off as some sort of imagination. Later on, however, when they saw strange markings at the base of a tree, marks that seemed to show someone had dug something up there, Yosef asked, "What could this mean?" "I don't know, but I think it's a clue," Yuval said. "We have to figure this out." The marks took them to the tree root, and then to a mysterious stone, with odd symbols hidden behind the tree root. Yuval's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at it. An unsettling feeling came over him. "This stone is important," Yuval whispered. "We need to investigate." Yosef's heart started beating wildly as he felt a primal fear creep at his heart. He felt something was not right, but he had not yet grasped the level of danger. Yuval continued to dig, and eventually found that under the stone was a hidden pit. "This is just the beginning," Yuval said in his voice full of determination. Yosef, feeling uneasy, said, "Maybe we should turn back. This feels wrong." But Yuval was not one to give up. "We are not going back. We need to find the truth." The team continued digging, and an ancient door came into view, buried deep under the soil. Moss and age-old vines covered it. The door seemed to invite them to come closer. When Yuval touched the door handle, an eerie whispering filled the air, as if the forest was trying to speak to them, trying to warn them. "This is it," Yuval said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the moment we've been waiting for." Yosef felt his pulse quicken. "This is madness," he murmured, but he followed. The door creaked open with a heavy groan, revealing a dark, uncharted space within. And as the door finally stood open, a gust of wind rushed past them and behind them, accompanied by the deep, unsettling noise that seemed as if the earth itself groaned at the intrusion. "We shouldn't be here," Yosef said, his voice trembling. Yuval, however, was already stepping inside, not fearing it. Micha'el followed with great eagerness, his curiosity driving him forward despite the ominous feeling of dread hanging in the air. This was the moment when they realized they had crossed into something far beyond their comprehension. A realm where every tree, every stone, every shadow held a secret. A secret that would soon entwine their fates, changing the course of their lives forever. As the door opened, eerie, deep silence engulfed the group, then stepped inside, and a silent stillness grew even thicker in the air, such as if the forest stopped its breathing. A chill breeze seemed to rise up from the ground, creeping through their skin with the freezing touch. Yuval first took a step ahead. He felt as if the old power was awakening within him. "Where is this taking us?" Yosef asked, mustering his voice, which cracked with his words. He knew this door led into a place beyond their comprehension. "We need to know what's hidden here," Yuval replied, determination in his voice, though a deep unease settled in his chest. The three men walked further into the stone passage. The air was damp and musty, and the walls all around them were covered with strange symbols that seemed almost cryptic. Yuval reached out and traced his hand along one of the symbols, as if he tried to decipher its message through his fingertips. "These markings, they're telling us something, but we need to figure out what," Yuval said, his voice barely a whisper, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Micha'el's eyes were fixed on the wall, studying the symbols intently. "This place, it feels so ancient, so mysterious, as though it's hiding something from us." Yosef felt a cold shiver down his spine. "Something's wrong. I can feel it. This place, it is not abandoned. It is alive." Yuval, in his own mania of searching for the truth, went ahead. "We cannot stop now. We came here to find some answers, and we'll find those." As they journeyed further, they saw a decaying stone pillar that had buckled under the weight of years. Under the rubble was a chest half buried in the earth. The surface of the chest was covered with moss and ancient engravings. Yuval didn't hesitate and knelt to open it, his fingers running across the cool surface of the chest. As he opened the lid, a deafening, ominous crack reverberated through the stone chamber. A sound of something large, moving beneath the earth, reverberated in the air and sent a shiver down their spines. "What was that?" Yosef asked, his voice shaking. But Yuval didn't respond because he was more interested in the chest than the eerie noise. As the chest creaked open, they found inside an old, creased map, drawn on a piece of ancient stone. The map was faintly glowing, its symbols shifting as if alive. The men leaned forward to study it closer. Each symbol corresponded to a place deep in the forest, places they'd never seen before, which weren't marked on any modern map. "This map, it's showing us something," Yuval said, his voice filled with awe. "It's pointing us to something hidden." But as they stood there, a soft, sinister laugh echoed through the chamber, so quiet at first that it seemed to come from the walls themselves. The sound sent a cold chill through the group. Micha'el, whose nerves were already frayed, turned to the others, wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Ignore it," Yuval said, though even he couldn't completely shake the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. "We're here to find the truth. That's all that matters." The laugh seemed to grow louder, as if the air around them was full of hidden voices. Still fearful, they continued onward following the glowing map. It led them deeper into the stone labyrinth, where walls seemed to close in upon them. It felt like the tunnel was shifting, as if the ground beneath their feet was alive, guiding them toward some dark, unknown destination. After what felt like an eternity, they came to the end of the tunnel. In front of them stood another door, this one darker and more foreboding than the last. It seemed to rise from the stone floor, covered with more cryptic symbols, older and more complex than any they had seen before. "We're here," Yuval said, staring at the door with a mix of fear and excitement. "This is it. This is the door that will reveal everything." Yosef hesitated, his hand trembling on the handle. "I don't know about this. Something doesn't feel right." Yuval, however, was already moving toward it. "We've come too far to turn back now." Yuval took a deep breath, grasped the handle, and as she opened the door, there was a blinding flash of light coming through that illuminated the entire room. So powerful was its impact that it pushed them a pace back, and the floor shuddered below. The laughter was back, louder this time, more menacing. It was not just in their minds, it was real, and it was coming from outside the door. "Ready for what?" Micha'el asked, his voice quivering with uncertainty. Yuval didn't respond. His eyes were glued to the doorway, now fully open, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. The light inside was dim, flickering, as though something unseen was casting the shadows. It beckoned them, calling them forward. "We have no choice," Yuval whispered. "This is where it all leads." And with that, the three men stepped into the unknown. The door thudded behind them with deafening effect, and the chamber seemed to fall into an oppressive, suffocating silence. The shallow breathing of the three men was all that could now be heard as they stood motionless in the dim, flickering light. The air seemed thick and oppressive, as though the atmosphere itself was closing in upon them. Yuval, Yosef, and Micha'el looked around, their hearts hammering in their chests with the sense that something bigger than they could fathom was about to happen. The room they had entered was huge, its walls carved with ancient cryptic symbols that seemed to have a faint, unnatural glow in them. The floor of the room was rough stone, uneven and cold. At the far end of the hall stood a huge stone altar coated with layers of dust and cobwebs, as though it had not been trodden upon for centuries. Nonetheless, there was something unnatural about the altar, a bad, foreboding presence that seemed to stem from it. Yuval took a cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the room. "This place, it's like a temple, but not one I've ever seen before. It feels wrong, like it was built to keep something in, not to honor something." Yosef, his voice trembling, whispered, "But what if it's meant to keep us out? What if we've come too far? This place feels cursed." Micha'el scanned nervously about him, his hand instinctively grasping for his chest. "We need to go, now before it's too late." Yuval turned toward him, grim but set. "We're not turning back now. The map led us here. We have to see it through." But as they went deeper into the chamber, a faint humming filled the air. A humming so faint at first they thought it was their imagination. But soon the sound grew louder, beating with the rhythm of Earth itself, almost like a pulse. The walls shimmered to it, as if this room itself were alive. "Do you hear that?" Micha'el whispered, his face white. "It's like the room is breathing." Yuval nodded, his eyes still fixed on the altar. "We need to understand what it's trying to tell us." As they drew nearer to the altar, a peculiar feeling crept over them, like a weight that had lain forgotten for centuries, pressed against their shoulders. The air cooled further still, and then a burst of wind shook through the chamber, and the thin light that had led them was extinguished. They stood there, plunged in darkness, until a form emerged in the farthest corner of the room. It was, at first, only a shadow, a silhouette, immobile. And yet as they opened their eyes fully, they made it out clearer. A tall, lanky figure attired in black, a face indistinct in a cowl. His very being was something other, like something that might be out of another era or other world. Who are you?" Yosef stuttered, voice shaking with terror. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised one long skeletal hand and pointed directly at Yuval. A voice, low and hollow, seemed to reverberate from the walls of the chamber themselves. "You are the one who has disturbed the silence," the voice said, its tone cold and ancient. "You have awakened what was meant to remain forgotten." Yuval stepped back, his heart racing. "What do you mean? What have we awakened?" The figure's hand fell slowly to its side, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then, the air grew heavy again, thick with the weight of impending doom. "You have unlocked the gate," the voice continued. "The gate to the forest's deepest secret. The thing that was never meant to see the light of day. The thing that lies beneath, waiting." Yosef gasped, his face turning pale. "What is it? What is this thing?" The figure finally stepped forward, its footsteps unnervingly silent. "It is a creature of darkness, born from the very heart of the forest. a being older than the trees themselves, older than time. It was bound here, sealed away by those who came before you. But now it is free. Yuval's blood ran cold. You mean, it's been here all along? In the forest? The figure nodded slowly. And now it calls to you, for you have opened the door. You have made the mistake of seeking answers in places better left undisturbed. It will not stop until it claims what is owed. Micha'el backed away, his face a mask of terror. We need to leave. We need to leave now. But the figure raised its hand, and the doors they had entered through slammed shut, trapping them in the chamber. There is no leaving now, the voice intoned. The forest has already claimed you. Suddenly, the altar at the far end of the room began to glow, and the stone floor trembled beneath their feet. The hum grew louder, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl, as if something large and terrible was stirring beneath the earth. The stone around the altar cracked, and something huge began to rise from the darkness beneath. Yuval stood there frozen, his mind racing. "We have to stop it," he muttered, his voice filled with desperation. "There must be a way to stop it." The ground began to shudder violently, and as it did, a massive, twisted shape rose from the altar. Its form defied description. Tendrils of darkness seemed to writhe around it, and then two glowing eyes locked onto them with an unblinking, predatory stare. The creature was awake, and it was coming for them. The air in the chamber was heavy with fear, suffocating their breath. The stone walls of the room shook as the ground beneath them convulsed in violent spasms. Yuval's heart was pounding in his chest as the monstrous shape finally fully emerged from the altar above them. The creature was now fully visible in all its full, terrifying glory. A grotesque combination of shadow and flesh twisted in unnatural ways. Its skin, if that's what it was a dark, slimy mass overlaid with scalings that shone with an eerie, unnatural light. Its eyes, those glowing, predatory eyes, stared at them with an unblinking, malevolent glare. It didn't simply look at them. It saw them, as if he could pierce their souls. His mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth, dripping with a viscous, oily substance. The growl that rolled from his throat was low, almost like a rolling storm, the sound vibrating through the men's bones, sending waves of terror throughout their bodies. Yuval froze, his hands trembling with a slight jerk as he kept holding up in front of himself the glowing map. Symbols on the map started to flicker and began responding to the creature's presence. But the more he looked at it, the more perplexed he became. It was like the map was shifting right in front of him, showing him symbols he had no idea about. "What is that thing?" Micha'el whispered, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might provoke the creature into attacking. Yuval's mind raced, his thoughts jumbled and frantic. "I don't know, but it's connected to the forest. This creature, whatever it is, it was trapped here long ago, and we've set it free." "Set it free?" Yosef whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "We didn't ask for this. We never meant to." "It doesn't matter now," Yuval said, still staring at the creature. "It's awake, and we're in its path." The creature let out a deafening screech, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very foundation of the chamber. It was an unearthly noise, like metal grinding against stone, so sharp and jagged that it made their ears ring with pain. In a single, fluid motion, the creature lunged forward, its massive, gnarled limbs stretching toward the men. Yuval barely had time to react as the air around him seemed to warp, a sense of overwhelming force crashing down on him. "Run!" Micha'el screamed. But it was already too late. The creature's gigantic claws shot forward, scraping against the stone walls deafeningly. Micha'el barely dodged in time, stumbling backward as its claws scraped past him. Yosef, quick on his feet, found himself slipping and crashing on the floor as his foot caught on the unevenness of the ground. Yuval's heart raced as he reached down to help Yosef, but before he could, a shadow fell across them. The creature loomed over them, its glowing eyes narrowed in hunger, its mouth dripping with saliva, its jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. "Move!" Yuval shouted, yanking Yosef to his feet and shoving him forward. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous chamber as the creature pursued them, its claws scraping against the stone as it closed the distance. The chamber was a labyrinth of shadows and stone, and Yuval had no idea where they were going. He knew only that they needed to move on. The stomping of the creature's footsteps behind them was thunderous, its growls rumbling through the stone, suffusing the air with a feeling of inevitable asphyxiation. As they reached the far side of the room, Yuval spotted another doorway, hidden behind a collapsed pillar. Without thinking, he dashed for it, pulling Yosef and Micha'el with him. They stumbled through the opening just as the creature's claws slammed into the stone behind them, missing by mere inches. They were in a narrow passageway, the walls closing in on them. The air was thick with dust and ancient moisture. But the creature was still coming, its massive form moving with terrifying speed. The men could hear its claws scraping against the stone, the low growl growing louder as it hunted them down. "We can't outrun it," Yosef gasped, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Yuval's head raced. The map, he had to use the map. But there was no time for that now. The thing was closing in on him, and he knew they wouldn't survive much longer unless they found some way to stop it. At the far end of the passageway, a faint light flickered. Yuval's heart skipped a beat. The map had been leading them here, he realized. This was the place, the key to stopping the creature. He pulled Yosef and Micha'el forward, urging them to move faster. The pass narrowed further, and the walls seemed to close in tighter. But ahead, they saw a strange symbol carved into the wall. This was unlike any of the others they had seen before, an intricate pattern that seemed to glow faintly with an eerie blue light. The air around it seemed to hum, and as they drew closer, they could feel a shift in the atmosphere, as if something ancient was waking up. "This is it," Yuval said, his voice hoarse with fear and urgency. "We have to do something with this symbol. It's the only way." But just as they reached it, the creature's growl echoed through the passageway, and the ground trembled with its approach. Yuval turned to Micha'el and Yosef. "We don't have a choice. We have to try." Without hesitation, Yuval reached out and pressed his hand to the symbol. A blinding flash of light burst out from the wall and threw them all to the floor. The light was hot enough that it seemed as if it was burning up their souls. Yuval shielded his eyes from the light, but through his squint, he could glimpse the form of the beast contorting in pain. Its growls became more frantic, more desperate sounding, as if trying to be forced back with an unseen force. The light intensified, and then, just as suddenly as it had come, it vanished. The passageway fell silent, the ground still trembling from the creature's last screech. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their labored breathing. What happened?" Micha'el asked, his voice trembling. Yuval stood, eyes fixed on the now silent passage. "I don't know, but I think we've only delayed it. We haven't stopped it." As light faded out, they saw the real truth. It was still alive, now more furious than before. The air in the passageway was still heavy, thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient dust. Yuval's chest rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths. His fingers were still trembling, and his heart raced as he glanced at Micha'el and Yosef, both of them just as shaken by what they had witnessed. "That light," Micha'el whispered, his voice shaking. "It didn't stop it. It just delayed it." Yuval's mind was filled with fear and confusion. He had thought the symbol would save them, but it was instead just a retreat trigger for the creature, not an elimination one. They had awakened something much more terrible than they could ever have thought of, and now it hunted them with a ferocity that they hadn't seen. The growls of the creature echoed in the distance, vibrating through the stone. The rumble of its approach was unmistakable. It was coming for them, faster now, angrier than before. "We need to find a way out," Yosef said, his voice strained. "We can't keep running forever." Yuval turned his head, scanning the passageway. The symbol on the wall had begun to fade out, plunging the passageway into darkness. The walls appeared to close in upon them, the passage dwindling with each passing second. "There has to be a way," Yuval muttered, more to himself than to his companions. He stumbled forward, desperation beginning to take root in his chest. He needed answers. They needed to stop the creature, or they would all perish in this forgotten place. Suddenly, the ground under their feet began to shudder, and the chamber before them was filled with a strange, unnatural growl. The sound of claws scrabbling against stone filled the air, as if the creature was moving just below them, circling like a predator. Yuval felt a cold shiver run down his spine. They could not outrun it. The beast was too close. "We're not going to make it," Micha'el whispered, his voice cracking. "We're going to die here." "No," Yuval said, his voice firm despite the fear that gripped his heart. "We're not. We'll find a way." And when they finally reached the end of the passage, there was a gigantic door before them. Ancient it was, with symbols of the same kind that had been found earlier on its surface. The door was enormous, the wood old and rotting, but somehow full of a strange power. Yuval approached it warily, his fingers running over the symbols. He could feel the energy flowing beneath the surface, like the map, like the altar. "What do we do?" Yosef asked, his voice filled with panic. "How do we open it?" Yuval examined the symbols closely, his brain running for any clue, any hint. Then he saw it, a mark on the door that was different from all the others. It was a circle, carved deeply into the wood, surrounded by jagged lines. It looked almost like a seal. "The seal," muttered Yuval, his heart leaping. "We have to break it." He pressed his hand against the mark, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a low rumble reverberated through the door, and it creaked as if waking from a long slumber. The sound was deafening, and Yuval felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The room shook, the walls cracking as the very foundations seemed to buckle under the weight of what was to come. Abruptly, with a violent strength, the door opened wide and let in a great deal of space beyond. They seemed to enter another world, a place that had seen no time, where air was cold and heavy. Trees were twisted here, their limbs stretching toward the sky as if skeletal hands. Shadows in the forest seemed to move and change, and in the distance Yuval could see it. A figure stood in the heart of the woods, watching them with aglow eyes. "The forest!" Micha'el stammered, his voice shaking with incredulity. "It's alive!" And then they heard it, the creature's roar. It was a roar so loud, so full of primitiveness, that it seemed to shake in a tremor the entire earth under their feet, no longer hunting them, only but calling them, bringing them into the depths of the forest where it had first been bound centuries ago. "It's time," Yuval whispered, his voice filled with a strange, awful certainty. "It's time to end this." The creature's roar echoed again, closer now. The ground trembled beneath them as the figure in the distance began to move, its shape growing larger with every passing second. The beast was coming, and this time it wasn't retreating. Without thinking, Yuval grasped Yosef's arm and pulled him forward into the forest. Micha'el trailed close behind, his face a picture of fear as the forest seemed to close in around them. They ran, the trees shifting and warping, as if the forest itself was alive, pulling them deeper into its grasp. But no matter how fast they ran, the creature was always just behind them. Its massive form loomed over them, its claws scraping against the bark of the trees, the ground shaking with every step it took. "This is it," Yosef said, his voice barely audible as he gasped for air. "We're going to die here." Yuval's mind ran wild as the figure in the distance drew closer. The creature was almost upon them, its breath hot on their heels. The forest was closing in, and they had nowhere to hide. There was no escape. And then, suddenly, clarity. Yuval remembered the map. The final symbol, the one that had been elusive for so long, was in front of them. He had seen it before, on the map, on the walls, on the altar. He had to use it. It was their only chance. They had finally reached the heart of the forest, a small clearing surrounded by gnarled trees. In the middle of it, a circle of stones lay on the ground, and the stone circle's surface glowed with an otherworldly light. It was the heart of the seal, the final piece of the puzzle. Yuval turned to Micha'el and Yosef. "We have to break the seal. It's the only way to stop it." The creature was nearly upon them now, claws stretching out to strike. The air grew heavy with its presence, and Yuval felt the very fabric of reality bending beneath its power. The three of them stood in the center of the circle, their hands pressing against the stone. Beneath their fingers, the final symbol. The one that would close the gate, trap the creature once more, glowed. Yuval whispered a prayer, closed his eyes as the ground started shaking with the power of the creature's last scream, and then everything went quiet. The silence was oppressive. When Yuval opened his eyes, the forest remained silent. The creature had disappeared. The gate was shut, and they were free. But as they looked around the clearing, they found that the forest was changed. The trees weren't twisted and dead anymore, but alive again, leaves full of life, green as a newly born spring leaf. But the shadow of the creature remained, staying on the periphery of their vision, reminding that darkness would never be totally eradicated. "We did it," Micha'el said, disbelief filling his voice. "But at what cost?" Yuval turned towards him, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. "At the cost of everything." And as they stand there, in the forest silence, Yuval is sure of one thing: the forest will always see, and one day the silence will break again,